Her hand closed around my wrist before I'd even reached my van. I still had a torque wrench in my other hand, dark green dress, hair pinned up like she'd done it fast in a car mirror, and a look on her face like the ground had just opened up in front of her, behind her. Through the tall doors of St. Agnes, an organ was warming up. She didn't let go. "Please," she said, low and fast. "Pretend you're my fiancé. Just for today. My ex is getting married in there in 20 minutes, and I cannot walk in that door alone." I looked past her at the church. White ribbons on the pews. A wedding planner with a clipboard sprinting toward the vestry. And I looked back at this stranger who had just grabbed the first man she found in a parking lot and asked him to be her whole future for one afternoon. That is how I met my wife. Let me back up. My name is Caleb Hartley. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a locksmith, not the kind who cuts a key at a hardware store kiosk. I restore old locks, antique mechanisms, church doors, 100-year-old safes. The kind of thing everyone assumes is stuck for good until somebody patient enough sits with it long enough to feel it click. My whole trade is getting people back into rooms they thought were shut forever. I was at St. Agnes that morning because the wedding coordinator, a woman named Dot who'd hired me for every antique lock in 3 counties for 20 years, had called me at 7 a.m. in a full-blown panic. The vestry door had jammed overnight swollen wood, old brass, the kind of lock that doesn't care that a wedding starts at 11. I'd fixed it in 40 minutes. I was walking back to my van, job done, invoice in my pocket, when a stranger in a green dress grabbed my wrist, like I was the last solid thing in the world. Here's the part I should tell you about myself, because it matters. I have been the best man at 6 weddings, 6. Nitor, my college roommate, my 2 cousins, both of my closest friends from the trade, even my own younger brother. 6 times I've stood at the front of a room in a rented tux, given a toast, danced with a bridesmaid, and gone home alone to a workshop full of locks that open easier than people do. I'm the guy who fixes the door, but never walks through it himself. I'd made peace with that, or told myself I had, right up until a woman I'd never met asked me to be the one thing I'd never gotten to be for real. Before I tell you how 20 minutes with a stranger turned into the rest of my life, if you believe the person always fixing things for everyone else deserves to have something fixed for them too, do me a quick favor and tap that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. Alright, back to the church steps. "You want me to what?" I said, mostly to buy myself a second because I'd heard her perfectly well. "Pretend to be my fiancé," she said again, "for 1 hour. Maybe 2. I know how insane this sounds. I have never done anything like this in my life." Her hand was shaking on my wrist. "My name is Nora. My ex-fiancé is marrying my cousin in there in 19 minutes. And every single person walking through those doors already thinks I'm going to fall apart. I cannot give them that. I would rather stand next to a total stranger with a tool belt than walk in there proving them right." "Your cousin," I said. "Ivy. We grew up like sisters. Julian and I were together 3 years. He proposed at Christmas, and by Easter he'd fallen for her. And by summer they were engaged, and today, 9 months later, they're getting married in the same church where he proposed to me." Her voice cracked exactly once, and she caught it. "Everyone in my family thinks I should be over it by now. My grandmother has spent 9 months telling anyone who'll listen that I need to move on gracefully. That bitterness doesn't suit me, and I've been dreading today for months, and I got out of the car, and I saw the doors, and I panicked. And you were the only person standing here who looked like he wasn't already headed inside to watch me suffer." I looked down at the torque wrench, still in my hand, at the toolbox by my feet, at this woman who had picked, out of every stranger in the world, a man carrying the exact tools of his own quiet, invisible life. "I need a name," I said. "And how we met, your grandmother's going to ask. And grandmothers always ask first." Something in Nora's face broke open relief, disbelief, the beginning of a laugh that didn't quite make it out. "Caleb," I said. "Caleb Hartley. I restore locks, old ones, Church doors, antique safes. I actually fixed the vestry door in there an hour ago. So if anyone asks why I was already on the property, that part's true. How long have we been together? 8 months, she said. It has to survive, Grandma Vivian, doing math. Where'd we meet? Nora looked at the toolbox at my feet and something clicked behind her eyes. You were called out to fix a lock at my apartment building. I was locked out at midnight in my pajamas. You didn't laugh at me. I would never laugh at a woman locked out of her own life, I said, and meant it more ways than either of us understood yet. She almost smiled. Okay, Caleb. I owe you more than I can say for this. You don't owe me anything, I said. 19 minutes, you said. We'd better go in. The church was already half full when we walked in, arm in arm, and I felt every head that turned. A ripple went through the third pew on the left family. Clearly, all of them recalculating in real time. A tall, silver-haired woman in the front row turned first, eyes sharp as flint, and I understood before Nora even whispered it that this was Grandma Vivian. Nora, Vivian said, rising halfway out of her seat, scanning me head to toe. You didn't tell me you were bringing anyone. This is Caleb, Nora said, and her voice had steadied completely, which told me more about her than anything else could have. Caleb Hartley. The smallest pause, so small only I would have caught it, boyfriend. Vivian's eyebrows went up. Boyfriend, how long has this been going on? 8 months, I said before Nora had to. I fix old locks for a living, which is how I ended up rescuing your granddaughter from her own front door at midnight. I've been trying to get her to introduce me to the family ever since. I understand today isn't the ideal occasion. But when she asked me to come, I wasn't going to let her walk in here without someone in her corner. Vivian studied me the way you study a lock. You don't quite trust yet, testing the give of it before committing any weight. Well, she said finally, at least you can talk. She sat back down. It wasn't approval. It was a door left slightly open, which, in my line of work, is usually enough to get through eventually. We slid into a pew near the back, and that's when Dot found us. The wedding coordinator, clipboard still in hand, doing one last sweep of the room before the processional. She stopped dead when she saw me sitting there with my arm around a stranger in a green dress. Caleb, she said slowly, I believe you told me an hour ago you were divorced from your tool belt for the weekend. Dot, I said, with as much calm as I could find. This is Nora, my girlfriend. Dot looked at Nora, looked at me, looked at the space between us where our hands had found each other without either of us quite deciding to, and something passed behind her eyes, not confusion, recognition. 40 years of coordinating weddings will teach a woman to read a room faster than anyone else alive. Dot said. Well, isn't that something? And she walked off toward the vestry without another word, but she glanced back once. And I had the distinct feeling she'd already understood exactly what kind of hour this was going to be, and had decided, for reasons of her own, to let it play out. The ceremony was long. The way these things always are when you're sitting beside a woman, gripping your hand hard enough to leave marks. Watching the man who once knelt in front of her marry someone who used to braid her hair as a child, Nora didn't cry. She held my hand instead. And about halfway through, without looking at me, she whispered, Thank you for not asking me if I'm okay. You don't look okay, I whispered back. You look like someone doing the bravest thing in this entire building. Those aren't the same thing. And only one of them needed asking about. She turned and looked at me properly for the first time since the parking lot. Like she was seeing an actual person instead of an emergency exit, and something in her face went soft at the edges. The reception was in a restored barn 20 minutes outside town, all string lights and long tables. And that's where Grandma Vivian decided to run her real test. She cornered us by the gift table with a glass of champagne and the particular smile of a woman who has caught more liars than she's ever let on. So, she said, how exactly did he propose, Nora? I never heard the story. Nora froze for exactly half a second, and I felt it through her hand. He hasn't, I said easily before the silence could stretch. Not yet, we've talked about it. but I restore locks for a living. Mrs. I'm sorry, I don't have your name yet. Vivian. Vivian. In my trade, you learn that the ones worth opening are never the ones you rush. Some locks need a decade of patience before they'll give. I'd rather ask Nora properly when it's right than do it fast just because everyone in a room happens to be watching someone else's wedding today. I looked at Nora. She's worth doing it right. Vivian's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips, for the first time since the church steps. Something behind her sharpness cracked just slightly. That, she said slowly, is a better answer than the one my own husband gave me in 1962. She looked at Nora for a long moment. He'll do, she said, and moved off toward the bar, and Nora let out a breath, like she'd been holding it since the parking lot. Julian found us near the dance floor an hour later, flushed with champagne and his own wedding, and made the mistake every version of that man always makes. Nora, he said, all easy charm ignoring me entirely. Glad you came. Means a lot. And who's this, the plumber? Locksmith, I said, not unkindly. There is a difference. Though I understand the confusion if you've never needed anything opened that you didn't already have the key to. Julian's smile thinned. Cute. Look, I just want to make sure there is no hard feelings. Ivy and I didn't plan any of this. Sometimes people just fall for the right person at the wrong time. Sometimes, I said, and sometimes people just don't recognize what they had until they've handed it to somebody who does. I kept my voice level, the way I would with a lock that's testing whether you'll force it or wait it out. Nora didn't need you to feel guilty today, Julian. She needed one afternoon where she didn't have to think about you at all. I'd consider that a bigger gift to both of you than anything on that table. He didn't have an answer for that. He drifted back toward his own reception, and Nora exhaled beside me like something in her chest had finally unclenched. Nobody has ever talked to him like that, she murmured. Nobody's ever had a reason to on your behalf before, I said. That's different than nobody being capable of it. The band called couples to the floor for a slow song, and Nora went rigid beside me. I can't, she said quietly. Everyone's watching to see if we're real. A bad dance is going to give the whole thing away. Then don't watch them, I said and held out my hand. Watch me. 19 minutes at a church door, remember. We can survive 4 minutes of a song. She stepped in. She was a terrible dancer. Honestly, all elbows and nerves, and I told her so quietly, against her ear, and she laughed a real laugh. The first one all day that had nothing performative in it. And somewhere in the middle of that song, with her family watching and her cousin's wedding still going on 20 feet away, I stopped thinking about it as a performance entirely. They're not staring the way they were an hour ago, Nora said against my shoulder. No, I agreed. I don't think this feels like pretending to me anymore, she said so quietly I almost missed it. I need you to know that. Whatever happens when tonight's over, it stopped being pretending for me somewhere around the vestry door, I said, before I even knew your name. We didn't kiss on that dance floor. It wasn't the moment for it, not with her whole family watching. Not with the wound of the day still, that fresh. But we finished the song holding on a beat longer than the music strictly required. And Dot, refilling glasses at the head table, watched us the whole time with the expression of a woman who'd already made up her mind about something and was simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. We exchanged numbers that night to sort out the story we told each other. It was never just the story. She called 2 days later to ask if I thought Vivian had actually believed us. We talked for 2 hours. She called again the next night about nothing at all. And we talked for 3. Within 2 weeks, the calls stopped needing an excuse. A month in, she came by my workshop on a Saturday with coffee and found me hunched over an antique safe lock a collector had shipped me from out of state. A beautiful, stubborn 19th century mechanism that had refused to turn for 3 different locksmiths before me. She sat on a stool and watched me work it for 2 hours. Patient in a way I hadn't expected from someone I'd only known a month, and at some point she said, without looking up from the gears she was holding steady for me, "Is this what you do with everything?" Just refuse to give up on it until it finally trusts you enough to open. That's the whole trade, I said. You don't force a good lock. You listen to it until it tells you what it needs. I think, she said slowly. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said near me without meaning to say it about me. I looked up at her then, actually looked, in the workshop light with brass dust on both our hands, and felt the same thing I'd felt on the dance floor, quieter this time. And sure, Nora, I said, can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if it's too soon. Ask. Are we doing this because it's real, or because we got tangled in a lie at a church door, and neither of us has figured out how to stop yet? She set down the tool she'd been holding. I've spent 9 months being the woman everyone feels sorry for, she said. I don't want you here out of momentum, Caleb. I'd rather be nothing to you than a thing you feel obligated to see through. I thought about the careful, reasonable answer. I didn't give it. 8 months ago, I was the best man at my brother's wedding and went home alone to a shop full of locks. I said, I've spent my whole life being the person who fixes the door and never gets to walk through it. You didn't obligate me into anything, Nora. You're the first thing in years I wanted for no reason I could explain with my hands. I don't know how to fix that. I don't want to. The old safe finally gave way between us with a soft, satisfying click. 3 locksmiths worth of stubbornness finally letting go. And neither of us was thinking about the safe at all when she kissed me. The rest of it happened, the way real things do, slowly and then all at once. At 3 months, my coffee mug lived permanently on her kitchen counter. At 5 months, Grandma Vivian stopped testing me and started simply expecting me at Sunday dinners, setting a 6th place without being asked. At 7 months, Dot cornered us both at another wedding I'd been hired to fix a lock for, and finally said what she'd clearly been holding since the vestry door. I knew inside of 10 seconds, she said, arms crossed, fighting a smile. 40 years doing this job, and you two were the worst liars I've ever coordinated. But I watched you with her all afternoon, Caleb Hartley, and I decided some lies are just the truth taking the scenic route. I wasn't about to get in its way. Nora and I were married the following spring, at St. Agnes, on the same steps where she'd once grabbed a stranger's wrist in a panic. Dot coordinated it, refusing payment, calling it the one I actually enjoyed. Grandma Vivian walked Nora down the aisle in her late husband's place and cried harder than anyone in the building. And when the officiant asked if anyone present had a token to offer the couple, Dot stepped forward and pressed an old brass skeleton key into my palm-worn smooth. Older than either of us. Every door I've coordinated a wedding through in this town for 40 years. This key's been in my pocket, she said. Never needed it for a single one. Consider it retired, and consider it yours. Some doors just need the right 2 people standing in front of them. I think about the church steps more than Nora knows. About the 6 weddings I stood at the edge of, always the best man, never the one the room was watching. About a woman who grabbed the first stranger she saw in a parking lot, never guessing she'd grab the one man alive who'd spent his whole life waiting, without much hope, to finally be the one someone chose to walk through a door with instead of just holding it open for everyone else. She thought she needed a stranger for 1 hour to survive her cousin's wedding. What she actually did was reach into a parking lot and find the one man who'd spent years fixing everyone's doors but his own, and hand him the first one that ever really opened for him. If a stranger has ever grabbed your hand at the exact moment you'd quietly given up on being anyone's first choice, I want to hear about it, because I don't think those moments are ever really an accident. Tell me your story down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it still amazes me how far these stories travel. Somebody wrote in last week from outside a courthouse of all places, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. And be honest with me before you go, if a stranger grabbed your wrist at a church door and asked you to be their fiancé for an hour, would you have said yes, like I did, or would you have gently pulled away and let them face it alone? There is no wrong answer. There is only the one you'd have to live with. If this story moved you even a little, do me one small kindness: tap that like button so it finds the next person who needs it. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because I'm here every week with a brand new story about the kind of love that shows up exactly when you've stopped expecting anyone to walk through your door. Fixed for good. I'm glad you're here.